According to Lord Farmer, who was tasked by Theresa May to do a report on women in prison, which was reviewed in the House of Lords on July 25th, 2019, with a debate, over 54% of women in prison currently are reported to have been victims of abuse, either sexual or emotional or physical abuse. And over 80% of women in prison are diagnosed with one or more mental health issues. And yet the number of women that we're incarcerating is rising. And as a mature Western democracy, we imprison more women than any other, European country, and also per capita, more women than North Korea and Iran. So we need to look at what we're doing with these women who are vulnerable, who have been abused, who have serious mental health issues, from anxiety and depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, to serious personality disorders. And we need to ask ourselves as a society what we're doing and why we're continuing to incarcerate these women. The National Audit Office in 2017 conducted a big review of mental health and health in prisons. And of 36,000 plus prisoners who self-declared in their review that they needed mental health support, only slightly over 7,000 were getting any mental health support. And when you consider at that point, over £500 million a year of our money is being spent, was being spent on these justice health contracts. So private companies like Virgin, Care UK, and others, including the NHS Foundation Trust that has spun out from the NHS, are meant to be providing women and other prisoners with mental health services. But at the moment, in this year's quarterly stats, we have the highest number of self-harm incidents and the highest numbers of deaths in custody of prisoners, let alone women prisoners, since they started recording these figures. So we need to ask, where is all this money going? Why aren't the women getting the help they need? Why are the deaths in custody and self-harm figures so high? And where are we failing these women? Because reoffending is costing society £4.9 billion a year, which we simply can't afford. It's a revolving door, and we just, as a society, not just in financial terms, but also in human capital and social terms, we just can't afford it.
So what's going on with the people who have the contracts for the mental health? They got the contract, and if they fail, what happens?
Well, from what I can see, absolutely nothing. I have asked under Freedom of Information data from these service providers. So as in everything else, it's sort of this culture of deniable culpability. So the Ministry of Justice just distances itself by having, salami slicing the profitable parts of the business. So anything that's vaguely profitable in prison, such as facility management, education, and now healthcare, is being privatized. And these private contracts are completely without scrutiny. So there are, for example, CNWL NHS Foundation Trust, which is Central Northwest London NHS Foundation Trust, has the responsibility for the Surrey cluster of prisons, and all the London prisons. So that's Bronzefield, Send, Downview, and then in the Mail Estate, Highdown, a couple of others, and also the Heathrow and the detention centres. And the contracts aren't written in such a way to say, you will deliver X numbers of therapy, you will deliver X numbers of personality disorder clinics. They're very broad, and basically from what we can see is that they're completely unmonitored and they're completely opaque. So, for example, another trust, South Staffordshire and Shropshire, runs the contract for HMP Drake Hall, which is in the Midlands, and 4 other prisons in what's called it was Lot 2 in the Staffordshire prisons when these were all tendered out a few years ago. So within that, you have a young male estate prison, you have a sex offenders prison, you have a women's prison, and you have 2 male institutions within this Lot 2 of the Staffordshire prisons. And within that, they're supposed to to have X number of psychologists, X number of psychiatrists, X number of mental health nurses. But for the 2 years that the contract ran, they were meant to be delivering a personality disorder clinic, which they couldn't because they didn't have the staff for it. They were meant to have a full-time psychiatrist, which they didn't, and yet they were still drawing down the funds to pay for the psychiatrist, which was a ghost post. The person didn't exist. So in the meantime, you have the highest rates of violence and self-harm at Drake Hall. The women can't access the services. We're letting women out who are unrehabilitated, who have spent long periods in prison, who are then just being released because we have to release at the halfway point without any kind of support, without any kind of help. And there doesn't seem to be even benchmarks of X amount of hours and X amount of posts, and then checking up on whether those posts and those hours are being not just contracted but fulfilled. So there just appears to be no accountability in any of these justice health contracts.
So the people who are supposed to be receiving the service, they can't complain because they're in prison and nobody listens to them.
Well, exactly. You can complain through the prison system, and you can complain through the healthcare system, which has its own separate complaint system, and then you can take it through the CQC. So the CQC, the Care Quality Commission, is supposed to oversee and monitor and regulate every health or healthcare or mental health establishment, and they do these inspections of prison healthcare units. But I mean, the CQC has basically lost a lot of credibility recently. You'll know that they were sort of busted wide open when they just sort of people looked into their reports and saw huge swathes of their reports for various institutions hundreds of miles away that they're meant to have been monitoring were just cut and paste of each other. There was no actual sort of proper investigation. It was just cut and paste of various different institutions in each other's reports. And so in the same way, when they come and inspect prison institutions, for example, HMP Downview, the manager who is responsible for the CQC liaison hasn't worked there for 4 years, but it's still listed on the CQC's own website that this is the woman who runs it, and this is the woman who's our contact there, but she's not worked at Downview for CNWR for 4 years. So there's no sort of, because these are the most vulnerable, damaged, and disenfranchised people in society, we think they don't have to have a voice. We think we don't have to hear them. We think we can shove them into prisons and just sort of, oh, well, they're not our responsibility, problem not seen, problem not heard, someone else is responsible. But actually, we're all responsible. We're all paying for this. We're all causing measurable harm, intergenerational crime families, and expenses that we just cannot afford.
Where was the Central Northwest London copy-paste CQC story reported?
It wasn't reported about Central Northwest London. It was reported about other care homes that CQC were meant to be having inspections of, but what they done was just literally cut and paste into several different reports.
Where is this reported?
Oh, it was reported everywhere. It was on the BBC. I'll send you the link.
Roughly when was that?
Less than a month ago.
Right. Yeah, I didn't notice, I've got to say.
It was a huge issue where they just lost so much credibility, and someone had to apologise. Of course, it's an administrative mistake, but it couldn't have been an administrative mistake because it was just it was more than once. Okay, if you've cut and pasted into another document, fine, it could be a mistake, but it was several times in serious investigations, where people had died, and in the same way, because the CQC is now losing credibility as an institution. Where do prisoners go? You can go to the Parliamentary Health Service Ombudsman once you've exhausted the internal complaints process, but you have to take time.
Oh, Farah, I've lost you. Farah, hello. I've lost you. Hello.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, so you said, what do you do? And then you said something about the internal complaints process.
Right, so a prisoner can complain through the internal prison complaints process to the governor. The governor will always hand it back to the healthcare company. The healthcare company then takes it outside to their internal, not within the prison, but their internal sort of administration. Once you've exhausted that, you can then take it through the Parliamentary Health Service Ombudsman if you take it through your MP. Those investigations years. And again, it's another sort of watchdog that's lost a lot of its credibility because it doesn't seem to have that regulatory sort of function. It sort of just seems to be a tick box exercise that doesn't really sanction improper administration or deaths in custody. Where there are serious issues and someone has died, there is the PPO, the prison and probation ombudsman. But again, all of these statutory bodies and all of these regulatory monitoring bodies, which we have to have as part of what's called OPCAT, which is our signed up UN commitments and obligations that we have to sign up to, they're just not functioning. They don't function in a way that is transparent or clear or accessible. And most prisoners, I think it's something like 80% of prisoners, have a below than average IQ. They're not going to be able to sort of follow these complex, convoluted, long-winded, extended complaints processes that sometimes just feel like they're designed to sort of put you off.
Okay, so, I mean, in my mind, there was a bit of a flowchart that you just created of accountability with the sort of patchwork regulation where you have these different bodies, including the private company. Somewhere along the line, I suppose there's a ministry, but and maybe a local government or something like that. But yeah, I can feel that you've just given me so many different layers, but one person. I mean, possibly much of what you told me is from personal experience, but
well, my personal experience is that I was diagnosed when I was sentenced in 2016 for crimes alleged to have happened in 2013 and 2014. I was diagnosed with quite serious mental health disorders, and I was really worried. I wanted to understand my own behaviour. I wanted to really sort of try and. This wasn't obviously the first time that I'd been in trouble with the law, and I really was at a point where I felt like I needed help, and I did everything I could to try and get help within the prison system. And I was just messed about. I was told at HMP Bronzefield that I wasn't ill enough, that it wasn't high enough. I didn't meet the sort of criteria for any kind of mental health service or intervention. Now, that was CNWL. Now, I complained about it. I took it all the way. I took it through to the Parliamentary Health Service Ombudsman, and Mark Field was then my MP. I was living in Westminster, and he was then the MP for Cities of London and Westminster. And Mark was brilliant. He followed it up with the Parliamentary Health Service Ombudsman. And 2.5 years later, I got a decision which I can share with you. I'll email it to you if you wanted to post it as part of this podcast. But I got a judgment from the Parliamentary Health Service Ombudsman saying that CNWL had said that I didn't qualify for any kind of mental health intervention because I was then a remand prisoner, and then when I was sentenced, their view was that the disorder that I'd been diagnosed with didn't really qualify for what the service that they could offer, but they were meant to be offering a personality disorder clinic, and that's what I had been diagnosed with.
Uh-huh.
So for 2.5 years, I suffered, and the judge saw fit to throw me in prison, even though he knew that I had this diagnosis. All of it was put before the judge, but he still saw fit in 2015 to throw me in prison and say, well, I'm giving you a prison sentence. I don't care about your mental health. Your mental health will be dealt with in prison. And it wasn't. So since then, having had the complaint upheld by the Parliamentary Health Service Ombudsman, I retained Dr. Anton van Dellen, who is now in the process of suing CNWL as the agency of the Ministry of Justice for clinical negligence, which is a breach under Article 3, which is the right to life. So your rights as a prisoner for health, including mental health and physical health, all come under your Article 3 rights, which is the right to life and also the right not to have to bear cruel and unusual punishment.
Such as the withdrawal of treatment?
Such as the withdrawal of treatment, such as not having, in spite of this government's professed adherence to sort of parity of esteem for mental and physical health. In prison, that just doesn't exist. In spite of these massive mental health contracts, it just does not exist. There is no parity of esteem for women in particular. there's all this sort of talk now of trauma informed and all these silly programs for sort of acknowledging and admitting trauma and talking about having an enabling environment. But you can't have an enabling environment in an environment that is hostile and designed to suppress and institutionalize and imprison you. So it's all just words. All of this is just words. It's just causing so much harm.
So you're talking about stats. You're talking about accountability. This Central Northwest London Trust, it sounds like they've got a lot of contracts. So
they have. I've emailed you the ones that I could get the figures for, and their contracts run at about 25 million a year, and then they get a top up on top of that. And then there are dozens of other trusts like Virgin and Care UK, whose CEO was recently up on corporate manslaughter charges because of their care of elderly patients in care homes. South Staffordshire and Shropshire is the hospital trust that's been responsible for all the neonatal baby deaths. So these are not, whether they're private or they're sort of spin-outs of the NHS, like these foundation trusts, they're raking in huge amounts of money, and women are self-harming and killing themselves at rates that we've never seen since these stats started to be collected. So we have to start asking, you're not only getting £2 million a year to run mental health services at Downview, you're then getting a top-up of, I think, around another 600,000. But why have 4 women killed themselves at HMP Downview in the last 2 years? And why have 6 others killed themselves post-release from HMP Downview? Why is the self-harm there so prolific? Why is there an ambulance there every other day? To take women to hospital from prison because they've self-harmed so badly. We have to ask ourselves, what is this money being used for? And couldn't it be used more sensibly to fund proper community health services rather than imprisoning women and then them getting no help and eventually self-harming and killing themselves?
Now, can I ask you a personal question? Have you been convicted of raising your hand, using a weapon, or using any physical violence against anyone?
I have never ever had a conviction for any kind of violent offence whatsoever.
So literally people are saying that you're the most dangerous woman in London or something like that, and the most you've done is a couple of block capitals and a message to somebody.
The most dangerous woman in London came from an article after my book was published in 2009, so it was a huge spread that the Evening Standard did. And it was the Confessions of London's Most Dangerous Woman, and that was my attempt to take back the narrative of what was being written and said about me. When I was convicted in 2005, it hit the front page of the New York Times and the Evening Standard and the London Times and the Metro and Daily Mail and God knows where. It literally was sort of front page.
Was it all fraud charges or abuse charges?
It was fraud charges, and it was not, and it was lying and stealing. I have never ever in my life been convicted of any kind of violent offence, and this narrative of dangerousness was then picked up by a sentencing judge, which then turned into probation's excuse to sort of weave it into what's called an oasis, which is their assessment. So probation staff are not trained psychologists or therapists.
So basically, you've been turned into a monster. So, but the lying and stealing is the type of stuff that some people call that white collar crime. I mean, it is white collar crime, but unfortunately, I'm a small brown woman, so I don't qualify for that. For that sort of sanitisation. Sure, but did you lie and steal with a gun or a knife, or was it all?
I've never lied or stolen with a gun or a knife. I've never had any kind of weapon. I've never carried a weapon. The only kind of stiletto I have is in my shoes.
So it's all just paperwork. That's everything that you did was just examples of paperwork, bureaucracy, administration, filling out forms, submitting them, and that type of thing.
Words. It's all words, and they've weaponized those words to turn them into something dangerous and, potentially very damaging. I was monitored at MAPA level 3, which is the highest level of MAPA, which is what Usman Khan and the other extremists from Streatham, Aman. The same higher. I mean, Usman Khan was monitored at level 2. I was monitored at level 3, which is reserved for the most dangerous, violent offenders.
So what's going on? Why are you being monitored at that level? What was the excuse for that? Because you're dangerous.
The excuse was that risk of psychological harm, because I'm clearly sort of some Silence of the Lambs character who can just psychologically damage people from a distance. With these amazingly powerful words I must be able to use.
Fucking hell. Okay, so they're basically saying...
Yeah, so be careful I don't psychologically damage you.
So they're worried that you will psychologically damage individuals. That's amazing.
Individuals working in the criminal justice system.
I've never, ever, ever heard... Obviously, I don't know much about this, but I've never heard of someone whose tongue is said to be so powerful that they go up a grade in terms of the danger list.
I think if you're a woman, and as you said, my offences all fell under basically white-collar crime, but I think if you're a woman and you're not white, there's this concept of sort of double deviance, which is that, first of all, you're not one of us, you're not a white middle-class man, and then secondly, you're a woman, and you're a foreign woman, and who the hell do you think you are? Coming here, having these opinions and making these complaints and criticizing, your host community. I think if you look at David Lammy's report and look at the way that ethnic women, minority ethnic women are treated in the criminal justice system, we're more likely to be arrested, we're more likely to get a prison sentence for minor offences, we're more likely to get a prison sentence sooner than our white counterparts for exactly the same crime, and we're more likely to get a harsher prison sentence.
Sure.
So there is a sort of double deviance of being a woman and then also being ethnic. But I have never ever used a weapon. I don't know what the sort of the dangerousness in real terms, how that can really apply.
Yeah. So how did your book do when you brought it out?
How did what, sorry?
Your book, how did it do?
It did very well. I mean, it raised a lot of... They tried to ban it. Imran Khan was my solicitor then, and they sort of wrote to him and said, she's not allowed to profit from the proceeds of her crime, and we'll shut it down, and we'll ban it, and we'll do this and that. And he said, we'll do that, and instead of selling a few thousand copies, she'll sell millions. So they left it alone. But there was stuff that was going on that I didn't write about because it wasn't finite, but there's a lot of criticism of the prison system at that time in the book. It's not just sort of the story of my life, but it's also talks about up until and including the time that I was released in 2007. And the way that the prison service functions, the way the Ministry of Justice gets away with what it does, is because people are dishonest about how it's run, about the lack of administration and maladministration, and also the maliciousness and stupidity of some of the people actually running, one of the most important departments of state. Some of the people running it are so hopeless and have these sort of fundamental Christian beliefs, and sort of believe in evil, and you have these ridiculous people sort of making interventions that don't work and that aren't based on any kind of policy or evidence, but, this looks good, let's try this. Forensic science and psychology and psychiatry in our prison system is absolutely, it's destitute. It's impoverished of any kind of
what you were just saying about what you were just saying about forensics. I read, and again, I'm not an expert in any of this, but I think it's the Science and Technology Select Committee that occasionally looks at forensics. And I can't remember if it was the Commons or the Lords, but basically one of them had the forensic regulator in. And I think that 2009, 2010 may have been the high point of forensic science in the police and everything like that. And then after that, the Tories came in, did loads of cuts, and
privatised it.
Yeah, exactly. I heard that the police had to bail out some of the leading firms in what you could call the forensics market, because if they didn't, they wouldn't be able to get any evidence. But it was market
That's
failure.
exactly
It's
right.
a dysfunctional market.
That's exactly right. And so you have this sort of flawed forensic system starting pre-trial, and that just sort of follows you into the trial. Then you have badly trained forensic psychologists and psychiatrists within the prison service, which is called government forensic psychology services, and it's a department within the Ministry of Justice, which is meant to monitor and administer forensic psychology to assess risk for release plans and parole for all prisoners who are deemed to be high risk. And these people are not monitored by the CQC. There is no evaluation of what skills they have. They're using risk measurements and matrices that are 20 years old. So we're releasing people like Usman Khan and Aman from Streatham using risk matrices and analysis that are 20 years old that are so outdated, which is why we're going to continue to have these kind of terrorist attacks and these awful incidents, because they're not using current or up-to-date, methods. And then you have people who are very serious, violent sex offenders and people who've committed the most awful crimes who know what to say. They know what to say to these very poorly qualified, very inexperienced prison psychologists and psychiatrists. They get through the hoops. They will know what to say to the parole board. Because they just sort of groom. They groom these psychologists.
Well, I think they also said that they're really short-staffed at the probation service. So.
Well, the probation service after Grayling. Chris Grayling's got a lot to answer for really just trashing the whole justice system with his transforming rehabilitation agenda, which is a whole series of legislation that brought in private providers and supposedly third sector providers, which split the National Probation Service, which was a world-class, highly recognised, brilliant service. He split it into two so that low and medium risk offenders would be managed by the CRCs, which is the community rehabilitation companies, and everyone else who was considered high risk was managed by National Probation Services. Now, that hasn't worked. So all of that is now being brought back in-house, and by July, having split it up into these 10 or 11 CRCs, now we're bringing it all back in-house. Meanwhile, you've had a brain drain of about 40% of frontline prison staff and probation staff who left because they didn't want to work sort of in this split service. There's a lack of serious senior experience. All the good older probation officers left. And now we have this kind of lack of mentoring, lack of, people for the new probation officers to learn from, because probation isn't something you can learn on a piece of paper. It's not a degree you can take. It's about people skills. It's about learning and watching what works. And it's about kind of understanding relationships. And if the really good ones, the older ones who've been doing it for 20, 30 years have gone, where are these younger ones getting their experiences from? Where are they getting their learning from?
Did you do an open university course when you were inside?
I did. I started a criminology course with the OU, yeah.
And have you been able to complete it?
It's still in the process. It's a long process, but I hope to complete it in the next year. I picked it up again about 6 months ago, and I've got, I think, 3 more long essays to write.
And what would you like to do with that?
I wanted to start thinking holistically about the way that women in the criminal justice system are treated. So, from the point of arrest, into the police station, into the court arena, into sentencing, into the way that judges treat women, into incarceration, and then rehabilitation and resettlement. And I wanted to work on a model which was gender-informed and based on trauma, and not re-traumatizing these women and not making them sort of enter the revolving door of the criminal justice system, and actually come up with bespoke solutions to the problems that are specific to women. And I sort of started to think about a program that either through intervention or diversion, you could actually start to deal with each woman as a whole individual, looking at her as a woman, as a mother, as a partner, as someone who's running a household and budgets and bills and working or not working, and actually address, like, have a solutions-focused, one-person approach to her, rather than just criminalize her, throw her in prison, don't give her any help, don't give her any mental health help. And so to sort of design a bespoke program for women. But I am at the moment very angry and disillusioned, and I think there's a lot of powers at play that want to keep these 4,000 women in prison, whereas in fact it's known that only about 10% of the women in prison are actually a danger to themselves or others. So you could shut 11 of the existing women's prisons and keep one and have those, 350 or 380 women, and actually treat those women and release the rest with proper care and support. But I think there's too many forces at play around privatisation and just keeping our incarceration corporation going. But I don't know that a program like the one that I wanted to design would ever work.
In which case, let us say, based on the sentiment you've just expressed, let us say that there's too much money being made from people unnecessarily being incarcerated and not properly rehabilitated. Would you consider taking your criminology degree and becoming a lawyer and representing people? Because at least that way you're helping some people, as opposed, in individual cases, and you've got a lot of experience, versus coming up with ways of helping people that no one's going to take up.
I think, given the judiciary that we have at the moment, which is much too white, much too old, and much too male, and very, very misogynistic, deeply misogynistic, and the way that I was treated in the Crown Court at Southwark last week, which was basically yelled at by a judge who's basically been told he'll never be promoted from Southwark to be an Old Bailey judge because he's just so rude. I was told by the judge when he was giving his summing up to the jury, in very angry terms, here is a woman, she knows her rights. She knows what her rights are, and she will demand that those rights are observed. And she knows how to complain, and boy does she complain, and she takes it through the complaint system, and she involves ministers and MPs. And I was accused, this was accusatory, it wasn't sort of an encouraged, oh, here's a woman who knows her rights, who knows how to do things, who knows how to get things done. It was, here is a woman, and we are going to squash her, and we are going to punish her, and we're going to make her look mad, bad, and dangerous, all three, because she dares to know and express and demand that her rights are met. And that's not a bad thing. So I don't know that I think that in this judiciary, that as it stands at the moment, with all the flaws, with all the systemic flaws that it encapsulates at the moment, that it's safe enough for people to really come out fighting for women and for women to have justice, to have sort of bespoke justice. I think judges are desperately frightened of women who assert their rights, of women who say, no, you won't treat me that way. I don't give you the power or the authority to treat me that way. I think it's women for far too long were seen as not complaining. I mean, if you look at the stats that the prison probation ombudsman gets regarding complaints from women, there are some women's prisons that just don't, for the whole year, submit complaints to the PPO. So we know that those prisons aren't decent or safe or operating, but women don't complain because they're just given a much rougher time when they do complain.
So where are your allies then?
I have very good friends who are women who, what you call, have lived experience. So there are other women who've gone through the criminal justice system like I have, and there's three of them who are very, very close friends who kind of pick up the pieces of me every time I get bruised and battered. I have a couple of very close friends who, one is a baroness, one is a lord, and a couple of MPs have also been very, very helpful to me, like Mark in the Parliamentary Health Service Ombudsman complaint about CNWL. I have amazing friends within the criminal justice system. Imran Khan is still a good friend. Lord Carlisle is someone that I can go to for advice. But I'm not, other women in my situation they're not going to pick up the phone.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I didn't really mean I mean, it's brilliant. When I said allies, I mean, it's brilliant that you've got the people that you've just mentioned, but I wasn't really necessarily thinking in the House of Lords specifically, or Commons.
Did you mean charities?
Well, I don't know exactly what I mean, but I mean, in a way, I mean, you have pointed to exactly the right types of places, because I suppose power is what I mean. Where is, but I didn't necessarily mean, voted or, awarded power in that way, but I just meant exactly as you were saying, groups, networks, whether it's ultra personal or more to the point, something which other people can find, which is campaigning, which is moving in a direction. I mean, I appreciate that things have been going in the wrong direction for a long time, so even if stuff stays the same, it would be better than what's happening now. But who's out there that's doing anything?
Who's out there that's doing anything is a really good question. So you have charities like the Prison Reform Trust, who've just been given £250,000 to run their women's project. Women on the ground in prison don't even know who the Prison Reform Trust is. And then you have Paula Harriet working at the Prison Reform Trust, who is an ex-offender with lived experience, who they won't fund properly to be able to run the programs that actually reach into the prisons, that make a difference, that ask the questions that prisoners want answered. So the funding from National Lottery, from all these grant makers and foundations and all these well-meaning philanthropists is being misapplied. We've had how many reports? We've had the Caution report, we've had Lord Farmer's report, we've had so many reports and reviews into women in the criminal justice system, and nothing changes, and things are worse than they've ever been. So we need to take out this whole NGO money churning system, because it's not helping the women on the ground. It's not helping women see any kind of change. It's keeping a lot of people who are very well meaning and probably, want to do good in jobs, in very cushy jobs. Why is Francis Crook on £160,000 a year as the head of the Howard League? And what is the Howard League actually doing for women? Yes, it's a secretariat for the all-party parliamentary group for women in the penal system, but what are they actually doing? Without the involvement of women in prison and women who have lived experience, nothing can and nothing will change, because these charities are not respected in prison. Women don't see them making a change. So why are they going to fill in their forms? Why are they going to help them with their outcomes when it's just about creating more funding loops, for these charities to sort of self-perpetuate? So I think change will come from within. I think women have to stand together and band together and say, actually, these are the things that need to change, and this is how we see, change happening. There are some very enlightened governors in the women's estate. There are some awful ones, but there are some very, very good ones. And where there's good practice, we need to celebrate and replicate that.
I noticed that with, say, something like the gender pay gap, there's a lot of headlines, there's a lot of attention paid, 1, 2, 3 times a year. But at the same time, it's a huge inequality, and I don't think there's really that much done about it. And I think that the people who kind of do the least, from what I can see, well, I shouldn't say it like that, but I don't think women seem that bothered about it. I'm talking about gender pay gap. That's what I've noticed.
How do you mean? Sorry, I don't understand.
So when I've looked at gender pay gap, which is obviously not the same subject, but I'm talking about the lack of solidarity amongst people who are affected. When I've seen stories about the gender pay gap, I see all of these top female Tories in the cabinet, and they just don't care, because they're obviously just on high wages, so they just don't care about it. So in the same way, these issues that are affecting women in prison, as you said, it could, there could be some change from within, but really it would have to be, because no one's going to listen to the prisoners. So, there's only some that will be able to have successful complaints or anything like that. So what would it take? Would it take it being really taken seriously by a political party, put on its manifesto? Because it's not like a big vote winner, is it? But at the same time, it's a necessary.
Prisons are never going to be sexy. The prison reform is never ever going to be a sexy vote-winning political campaign or an election point. What we have to do, and what we've started to do, is we have put together, so this is me and 3 other women ex-offenders, and also supported by Courtney Griffiths, Keith C., and Bernard Sudden, a magazine which is beautiful in that all of the artwork in it is by women prisoners, and some of the content is from human rights specialists and specific specialist NGOs, but about 80% of the content of almost 70 pages is women's personal experiences of what is happening to them around their mental health, around their medication, around what it feels like to be separated hundreds and hundreds of miles away from your children that you can't see because they can't afford, to spend hundreds of pounds on plane tickets. So these are the real life stories of women in prison right now. And what I want this magazine to do, it's called The View, is to humanize women in prison. That we're not all Myra Hindley, we're not all mass murdering, dangerous, crazy criminals. Actually, we need to see the human side and the humanity in these women, that every single one of these women is someone's daughter, is possibly someone's mother. We need to think about the 17,500 children a year who are separated from their mothers. We need to think about the 37% of women who lose everything. So that means home, family, possessions, children, property, everything, money, by the time they leave prison. So that's 1/3 of women will leave prison with absolutely nothing. We need to think about why only 1 in 10 women leaving prison are in employment a year after they leave prison. We need to humanize the faces of these women, and most of all, I think the way to get this message through to the public is it is costing us £39 billion a year to run one of the most dysfunctional departments in government, the Ministry of Justice, which is now hopefully going to be, subsumed into the Home Office, although under Priti Patel, I'm not sure that's such a good idea. But, the Ministry of Justice is the poison chalice in Cabinet. Nobody wants it because it's always a disaster. There's always going to be dreadful press headlines and stories about what's going on in prisons and what prisoners are up to. And, they have these 12-course meals at Christmas and stuff. It's never, ever going to be something that's going to be, a sexy point-scoring or election-winning mandate, campaign. But what we really need to do is just make it about money. I think people care about money and people care about mental health. And if you were to take that money that's being spent on these prison, they're called justice health contracts, and actually probably fund community services and actually make people understand what it's like to live with complex PTSD, make someone understand what it's like to be told you've got personality disorder, it can never be cured, we're going to lock away the key and just throw you away forever. And actually humanize this situation, which is, it's only 4,000 women. If we can do this in the women's estate, we can then move it into the youth estate, we can then move it into the male estate, and we can start to treat, people who need help with humanity and decency, and not just this kind of, 3 strikes and you're out, kind of Michael Howard hangover from when the Tories brought in thousands and thousands of laws to just criminalise and build more prisons when they shut the asylums.
How many women are in prison in this country?
3,800, of which it's considered maybe 10% are a serious risk of harm to themselves or others. And 80% of women are in prison for non-violent offences.
Right. And how many men are there in prison?
79,000.
Wow, so it's a massive disparity. But also, what you said was that how many of the women of those 3,800 or something? Did you say only 10% are in for violence?
Maybe 10% are considered a risk to themselves or to the public. So the rest could actually be managed, in the community. They could be managed with the right support, the right mental health, and the right probation officer.
So it's all about being seen to be punishing.
It's about our drivers as a society. We're a very retributive, punitive society. We don't, the voice of the victim and the voice of the defendant in the criminal justice system is completely lost. It's a bunch of judges and a bunch of lawyers who are all Oxford educated, all go off and have a nice drink at the club, or have weird handshakes and wear one leg of their trousers up afterwards. So it's not actually even about justice. It's just about justice being seen to be done and retribution.
Right. Okay. Well, Farah, it's been really good talking to you. What do you think in terms of? I think so. The notion of scandal, and then the notion of public relations, because it sounds like there are plenty of terrible things happening. So then the question is the degree to which any of these things are turned into an actual scandal, seen as a scandal. And then afterwards you bring the pay thing in, but, how much it costs. But then you've also got this thing about decision making. Who's making these stupid decisions? Is it just the ministers? Or is it also there's so much discretion?
The ministers, sadly, Rory Stewart was one of the first ministers in a very long time to kind of grasp the nettle and say, if reoffending rates at these 12 prisons where I'm putting airport style scanners and other intensive security measures, if violence hasn't decreased at these prisons, I will resign. Now, sadly, he resigned for other reasons. But ministers never, ever, it's all a bunch of sort of civil servants like Richard Heaton who are dangerous, disaffected, sort of, fundos who just think that they can lock people up and put this unevidence-based policy, and then when that doesn't work for 5 minutes, we'll change it to something else. It's all really, really dangerous. Ministers are not involved in the running of the prisons. It's all down to this layer of civil servants. And then you've got 12 directors within HMPPS, which used to be called NOM, so Her Majesty's Prison Probation Service is now one other agency within the Ministry of Justice. You've got 12 on £130,000 a year. You've got a director for everything.
Okay, so back to what I'm asking about is to do with accountability. So the chain of accountability, you've got governors, you've got ministers, and as you said, you've got various layers of civil servants, etc., etc. So how many of these people have to live with the consequences of what they do? I mean, for example, you told me that there was somebody who raped a prisoner and lost his job. Who was someone who was he a governor or something like that? I can't remember.
Yeah, there were 3 of them at HMP Downview. The one went to prison for 5 years. It took us 5 years to get him.
Was he a governor?
He was a governor, yeah. His name was Russ Thorne, and then there were 2 other senior people within Downview. One of them jumped and killed himself. One of them was not convicted. He was acquitted.
But the governor is the governor is the governor, right? The person in charge.
There are several governors. You have a governing governor, then you have a security governor, then you have an operations governor, then there's about 7 different governors within the prison, all under the governing governor role. Right. So he was a governor, and he was basically trading sex with this very vulnerable woman prisoner for mascara and Mars bars. He told her that he loved her and he would bring her mascara and Mars bars, and she was naive and vulnerable enough that she fell for it. But there were no consequences. I mean, the Ministry of Justice went into abject denial every single time this happens. Every single time.
Okay,
there was another governor.
But just to say this, Farah, I mean, that is something which anywhere would be an outrageous thing. But what about when you have inhuman decision making? Because that's a real problem. I feel that's a problem. Inhuman decision making, where people are making decisions that are either absolutely outrageous or just really not thinking about the consequences. Either way, it's bad and vindictive, as you said. What can be done to highlight the nature of that type of thing? I mean, first of all, that it's happening. I mean, if you look for that type of information, are you basically just refused on the grounds that it's too individual, it's too personal, and then afterwards the data is just not given? How does one highlight if somebody makes a decision that's just cruel? How do we bring accountability to that?
Well, they don't. It's the Ministry of Justice, and they don't. They just
hide. I'm not asking if they do. I'm not asking if it's a good system. I'm saying, is it possible to either think creatively or anything like that? Is it possible at all to introduce any accountability when it comes to cruelty? And that includes the court of public opinion as well.
Absolutely. Where there is a death in custody, where women are dying and killing themselves, we need to introduce a new offence of manslaughter by negligence or manslaughter, there has to be absolute accountability with
But
the head of a
I meant before that, Farah. I meant before people die. I mean, sometimes you have what's basically just bullying, vindictiveness, and you just think, hey, you've just gone too far, and they just don't care. This is what I'm imagining is happening a lot, and which is going to push morale down. So when you have that type of misbehaviour where it's just vindictive and it's cruel, is it possible for anything like that to get out of the place where it's happening and to be judged, or is it all internalised and ignored?
It's internalised because prison officers, for obvious reasons, they sign the Official Secrets Act. They're not allowed to talk about what goes on. When they whistleblow, they are ostracised. They are humiliated.
Okay, so
the other thing we need to look at is it's not the prison officers, it's the leadership in the prison system, in the Ministry of Justice at the moment, which is not held to account. Prison officers are given so little training in mental health, in how to spot when someone is suffering, what to do. Someone keeps on saying they're going to hang herself, or she's going to do something, or she's violent when she's normally not violent, or she's acting out, or she's screaming and yelling, when it's not in her personality.
So how does one then put pressure on the layers of leadership? And when I say that, I mean with respect to accountability. I mean those stats. So let's say they are honest with the stats, which I assume they are not. But let's say they are honest with some of the stats. How does one get them to respond to those bad performances in the stats?
It's a really good question. I mean, it has to be the ultimate accountability should lie with the minister, but the minister always takes shield behind all his civil servants because they don't tell him the truth. They don't say to him, Minister, we've had 12 deaths at this one prison. It'll always be, there was 2 suicides and the rest were natural causes. They're not filled in enough. They're not told enough. There needs to be much. We need to be adhering to our OPCAT obligations, which is the scrutiny which is required of us as a country to make sure that these institutions are safe and decent. And we're not doing that. There is no respect within the prison system for the PPO. There is no respect within health services for the CQC.
Okay, how about this then? When people are in prison, what kind of access do they have to things like the internet?
None. Zero.
Everyone has no access?
No, you have access to something like an intranet, which has very limited, very censored content for education. So you can access the BBC Writers' Room, for example. You can't access any of the news sites. You can access bits of Open University for learning. But there is no internet access within prisons. There's a prison service instruction about how there is no internet access and there's no social media. You're not allowed to change your social media or beyond social media if you're a prisoner.
So you're not allowed to communicate with anybody, in a way?
You can write letters. All your letters are subject to monitoring, except supposedly your Rule 39 letters, which are legally privileged to your MP or certain organisations or your lawyer.
What about emails?
What about emails? There is such a thing as email a prisoner, which you can email. It's all run through a service, so the email is printed off by the prison service and handed to you after they've read it. And then you can respond back using a form, but then that email is scanned and sent back to whoever wrote you the email.
Amazing. I did not... I mean, when you say it, I am... as you say it, I realise I shouldn't be surprised, but, I mean, that's high-level kind of mind control.
Well, it's insane, and Lord Farmer actually advocated for Skype-type phone calls and visits for women in particular, and the Ministry of Justice absolutely point-blank refused. They said that it was too much of a security risk. So it's all run. The driver is not rehabilitation. The driver is not humanity or decency. The driver is just about security. How can we contain and control these people? Never mind that it's trashing their lives and their families and they actually can't talk to their children, or have face-to-face visits with their children. Never mind that Skype is a really easy to manage and easy to control kind of, a medium. It's just about control. It's not about how can we make this more humane. It would have been very easy to put Skype into prison cells. A lot of prison cells now have phones. But even your phone call, your numbers have to be approved. They have to go through a whole security process. They're all recorded. They're all monitored.
Yeah. So the psychological attack of disconnection to completely disconnect you as a human being is pretty serious, and if they want you to be rehabilitated, then if they're going to say you can't have any connection with the outside, what positive things can you do when you're inside?
Well, absolutely nothing. Education is broken. It's ridiculous in the prison system. Again, it's been salami sliced so that it's all been sort of farmed out to these ridiculous companies like Milton Keynes College and a couple of these other ones, Chelsea and Westminster College, I think, are running some of the education stuff at the moment. But they're just these massive contracts, one size fits all. I can't tell you how many times I have had to do. I've written a book. I've written for practically every single publication in this country, and also the Times of India and Vanity Fair in New York. I have written massively. I've had to do level 1 English every single time I've gone to another prison because they get paid an outcome payment every single time I do this level 1 English, math, and IT. So it's never bespoke about what the woman needs for education. It's about what can we stick on you so we can get an outcome payment. And then there's nothing like art. All of the art programs have been cut. The writing programs have been cut. It's all about, this is grayling again, it's all about IT, level 1 and level 2 English and maths, which of course are important, but if you have them already, there's no point in you doing them again. And then there's huge levels of autism in prison, of people who find it very difficult to learn kind of through normal teaching methods. There are people that have educational plans on the outside, and they're just sort of forced to sit in classrooms and be bored and not really learn anything because this is the one size fits all that every prisoner has to go through.
So I take it you're not allowed to teach anybody anything then?
You're not allowed to what?
You are not allowed to teach anybody anything.
Oh my God, are you mad? I almost got bloody sent to I don't know where for doing a prison magazine that they'd asked me to do, and then when we did it, a whole load of us did it, I was told the content was depressing, so I got into huge amounts of trouble for this prison magazine, which is what The View has come out of, because we managed to get a copy of it out to my solicitor after we'd done it. But anything creative is just, thoughts, creativity are just considered sort of too risky. It's too risky. You can't be thinking outside of the way that they want you to think.
How did you do it?
Well, I'm not allowed access to any computers.
No, exactly.
Because I'm so dangerous. Well, no, but there was a woman called Victoria who'd been a graphic designer before she went to prison. She was in prison for murder. And she was a fantastic graphic designer. And we put together this amazing magazine, showed it to the governor. And it was a new governor who'd just been brought in from Wandsworth, and she just freaked out completely, saying, "Oh my God, this is very depressing. I can't have this." And again, it was all of the true stories of what was going on at Downview, about recall, about the transgender wing that they just opened there, which was causing all kinds of problems. And they just didn't want it out. They didn't even want it out in the prison system, let alone
you got it out. You got it out.
Of course, they got it out.
So, how come she had a computer?
Well, there are computers to do things like layouts. You can learn how to type a letter in your level 1 IT. So for the most basic things like spell check and stuff like that, but it wasn't connected to the internet. I think we had to do it on some like 1970 version of Publisher or something. But it's not any sort of fancy. It's not updated to any kind of connectivity or current programs or anything.
Right, but the content was brilliant and the structure was nice.
It looked like a prison magazine. I mean, we made it look nice, but we weren't allowed to use a scanner. You're not allowed to have a scanner in prisons. I mean, it was just bizarre. It was kind of the seed for the View that we've created now, but it was banned. It was just, we were told we couldn't do it. We weren't allowed to do it. When a lot of women's prisons actually do prisons magazines, but Downview Governor thought that ours was depressing.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose the other thing is that actually you're probably quite an asset to the UK economy on a global level. You have been already.
The prison service, yeah.
So they should really be thinking. I mean, obviously, there's many things they should be doing, but you could be making them money. I mean, directly, not because you're a prisoner, but because you're actually doing stuff from in there.
You're not seen as a resource. You're seen as a risk. You're seen as a number and a widget that is just there to fill a cell, to keep her prison full so that she can get maximum funding for it. They're not seen as any sort of creative resource. It's just about containment. And I wasn't very good at being contained.
So what about if you said, I would like to become a computer programmer? Would they just say, nobody in this place is allowed to become a computer programmer?
You have charities like Prison Education Trust, which fund courses that are quite sort of innovative and quite interesting. So I did a level 3 in quantity surveying and sort of assessing how many bricks I would need to build something and the value of this and stuff like that. So you can do some quite, you can do horticulture, you can do graphic design, stuff like that. But anything to do with anything connected to the internet is just a no-no. It's just too risky for them. They can't get their heads around that. Not every one of us is Julian Assange, and we're not all, hackers. They just can't understand it. It's too risky. So computer programming, certainly not in the women's estate, and I doubt it in the male estate, not in the closed estate.
I sent an FOI to Belmarsh asking for all correspondence with central government and all communication from the top of the prison to the staff, specifically in relation to Julian Assange. I sent that about 6 weeks ago. After about 3.5 weeks, they asked to clarify, and they said they needed another 4 weeks. By which time the trial will probably be over. But part of
that's standard operating practice. You'll get a letter back saying they can't release it in the interest of national security. There's a exemption under GDPR. They won't release it.
So, in which case, it makes me wonder, in the case of what we're talking about, because it was one thing when, people said, oh, look, Grayling won't let people fucking read. But things like not being able to learn how to code and stuff like that. I mean, you said after a year, people don't have a job. But they've had all of this time to do their training inside. So, what's the policy? Is there just a straight policy?
Prisons are just human dumping grounds. We have to stop pretending they're anything to do with rehabilitation. They're not. They're really not. We just have to stop pretending. We just have to accept the state of things as they are, which is that we're funding a bunch of dummy contracts, which is contracts for mates. Because if you look at the churn between the high levels of the Ministry of Justice and the Department of Health into G4S, Serco, Capita, all these other companies, you've got Lord Condon sitting on the board of G4S. You look at the sort of the leakage.
Hold on, Lord Condon, is that the guy who used to run the Met?
Yeah.
Paul Condon, right, okay.
Yeah, so he's sitting on the board for G4S, which is a security company which was actively bidding for prison contracts until, of course, the whole tagging scandal along with Serco, when they were tagging dead people and people that had left the country. You look at the leakage, we have to just stop pretending. We have to take this whole idea of rehabilitation out of our heads, because it's not happening. And we're going to have more and more and more attacks, like we had on London Bridge and like we had on Streatham High Street, because these people are coming out. It's like boiling a frog, isn't it? You put the frog in cold water and you turn it up and you turn it up and you turn it up, and the frog explodes. And so we're letting out these boiled frogs from prison, and they're exploding, and they're going to kill, and they're going to maim, and they're going to harm, and there has to be some accountability. All of it is actually attributable. These murders on London Bridge of these two young kids are directly attributable to the government, because they failed to rehabilitate this man, Usman Khan, while he was in prison. He begged for assistance. He begged to do the de-radicalization program. He was told it wasn't available. So where does the responsibility lie? And this is going to continue to happen and continue to happen.
And who said it wasn't available?
The prison service told him it wasn't available. He didn't fit the criteria. He got no psychological help at all while he was in prison. And he begged. And I know that's true because it happened to me. I begged for mental health support. I was told I wasn't a priority.
He's the one who was done for handing out leaflets. That's why he went inside, right?
The original offence, yeah, it was a terrorism offence.
But he was handing out leaflets, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was stupid, but he got some ridiculous sentence for it and came out, and then came out unrehabilitated, and mad. You can't keep
But he
people...
came out worse than he was when he went in.
Of course, you can't keep people in these environments and think, A, they're going to get rehabilitated, and B, they're not going to be angry.
So it was a breeding ground.
Of course, and some of the wings in some of our male prisons now are run by Muslim Brotherhood, and Muslim men who are told when they go in, and these wings are run by Muslim Brotherhood, are basically controlled and coerced by these, so-called Muslim groups. And it's young men who are going in, who are then being hardened and bullied by much older men who are just seasoned terrorists.
Fucking hell. Well, Farah, it's been brilliant talking to you. What have we missed out? Is there anything that you want to say that we haven't said?
I want to do more about brutalisation, but I'm really tired now. Can we do it another time?
Of course. I mean, what I'll do is I'll just send you this recording and see what you think of it.
Yeah, that would be brilliant. But let's keep that one separate, because that's where I want to talk more about what is happening to me. But I think this one is... I think you asked really good questions. I think we covered loads of it.
Fine. Well, I'll stop the recording and I'll send it to you.
Okay, brilliant. And then we can think about how to edit and what to do next.
Yeah, I mean, I think there was something towards the... I mean, I'm not an editor like the person who edited the one that we did with John. But one thing that I am thinking is that towards the end, you said we need to stop pretending that there's any rehabilitation that's any part of this, because it's just about, contracts. That might be a good way of starting.
Yeah.
And then, by the time people get to it at the end, you'll say, well, look, you haven't been shortchanged because, we told you this was something that you were going to get. You get it at the beginning, and then afterwards we just build back up to it.
I think that's really good, yeah. Let's do that.
Because then it's a kind of teaser. Okay, brilliant. I know that you get asked on the TV and the radio quite a lot, but I don't think I heard your story until John told me about you. But I think by asking for statistics, I mean, I don't know who does this. I mean, if it's the Howard League, then obviously it doesn't mean much. But by asking for statistics and just working out, because I saw you were refused at FOI on the basis it was too individual, the person who you were asking about. Well, in the world of FOI, that's kind of quite schoolboy error. So apparently you've got two things. One's called fishing, one's called grazing. Grazing is, I think, what you were doing. You knew what you wanted and you went in quite narrow. So one of the ways to get around it is to just don't be quite so narrow. And so turn it into a fishing expedition, even though So that means you won't be able to nail the person. But what you will be able to do is you'll get the stats for the whole prison.
Oh, that's a good idea. Yeah.
Because
great idea.
It's wider. You get stats. Basically, the bigger the table, the better. And so apparently another thing that you can do is you can say, can you give me... So first of all, you say, is your data captured in a database? What's the name of the company that makes the database? And then here's the killer. You say, can you tell me how many fields do you have in terms of columns and rows? How many fields have you got? And then you say, can you name me all of the fields? And then you know exactly what data is being collected.
That is so clever. That is so brilliant.
Yeah, so good. for someone like you, one of the things that you could do is to list all the prisons, get the names of the databases, work out how they're measuring it, what they're measuring, how they're doing it, and then start asking for the spreadsheets, and you can start marrying it all off. You may even, if you were to do that, if you were to diligently, patiently do that, and I can't see why you wouldn't, then you could end up with a larger data set than they have. Because they may not even be comparing stuff between their different places. And so you can start...
They do benchmarking. They do this thing called benchmarking. So they claim to do it. I don't know how
Well, that's brilliant. If they claim to do it, then that's what to FOI. So you FOI their benchmarking and you ask for the formulae. You say, "Can you give me the formulae, please?"
Can I really? I didn't even know that.
Well,
Okay,
why
that's
not?
great idea.
Why not? I mean, again, as you say, it's public money, blah blah blah. So you say, "Give me the formula." Like what the fuck's wrong with that?
They always use this commercial exemption or a national security exemption.
But I think that would be so difficult to argue because you're literally just talking about measuring of performance or statistical phenomena in a way. But the thing is that those benchmarks are. I suppose the question is, what is the bent of the benchmark? What's the effect of the benchmark? Does it affect funding? Is there gaming?
Oh yeah,
because
it does.
Of that?
That's the only reason they do it.
Yeah, so all the gaming and the targeting that will be happening, underneath that or that will be driving it, that's all stuff to be asking questions about, to be speculating about, obviously in a non-scary way because you're so scary, But this is all stuff. I mean, this is your topic, not mine. But I think you're very, very good on a lot of this stuff. So when it comes to the stats and stuff like that, I don't think there's any reason why that should be stopped. I mean, another thing that would be very interesting, I mean, you gave me this, is to find out what medications are most frequently being prescribed within the jail. And yeah, so
that's a great one. Yeah, that is a great one.
Because it may well be.
That will show the trend of increasing opiates. I should do that. That's a great one.
Yeah, so you say, what's being... So you don't say what's most. You just say, can I have a list of everything? And then, you can do it bit by bit or all in one go. You can say, can I have a list of everything? Can I have the quantities? Because eventually you can find out how much they're paying.
Yeah.
The other thing is to work out, how many doctors are there and stuff like that. So eventually you'll find that there's just 2 or 3 doctors and they're being leaned on to prescribe just one thing, basically. And everyone's on one thing. Very likely, isn't it?
Oh, yeah, you see it. You see it anecdotally and you see it, yeah.
And what you would probably find as you go around the country is that there'll be some prisons that only have one drug and other ones that only have another.
And it'll depend on what the CCG, the local CCG is advocating, won't it?
Yeah, can you imagine finding that out? Because, I mean, the word... I mean, it's quite funny. In the Mail this weekend, I looked at the business section, and one of the women who I haven't seen right before, Marie Pagano, she got to do the business column, and she talked about interest rates, and she said financial apartheid. And it's so funny seeing that in the Mail. So, when you see the different way in which different people are treated. I mean, if you look at the way Jeffrey Epstein was running sex trafficking, and in 2008, when he supposedly got done, he was able to go...
The deal he made, yeah.
Yeah, he was able to go to work for 13 hours a day, maybe even 16 hours a day, come back to sleep in jail, and then just be out again. And they hardly monitored him at all. He was a sex offender, blah-de-blah. So those different types of treatment, those different types of behaviour, it'd be interesting to see, who's allowed access to a computer, So that's, again, the other ways of, measuring it and then finding out what's the benchmark, how's the decision made, because these are all decisions, so we've got to look at the borders and the border lines and the boundaries and say what's going on.
No, that is interesting. Right now I need to get myself out of my own predicament and then start FOIing them all over the place, I think. But that's a good plan.
Well, it's an interesting one. I mean, you say you've got to get yourself out of your own predicament. I mean, obviously you do, but let's say they want to put you back in, which obviously they do. Then the thing is, it sounds like you've been doing a lot of work either way. And they're just doing what they're doing. They're just doing that. So really the thing is, I mean, it sounds like they've got you on some sort of a weird... It's not even a technicality. They're just being creative. So the fact is, like the Don King line, if you have to go back, there won't be much you can do about it. But one thing's for sure, it looks like you're dedicating a lot of the rest of your life to making things better. So, if it so happens that you're going back, you're the bigger thing that you're doing is trying to help things get better. So you're not going to stop shining a light on this.
I've been doing that for years and years, and I actually need to have a life now. I'm in a relationship where this has really made me kind of think about what kind of life, you don't really miss something until you have it. And I haven't been able to be in a properly committed, loving relationship because I've been just battling on so many fronts. And, we have fun, we laugh, we have a great time. This is someone who really cares really deeply. And it's all the stuff that I've had to sort of let shed from my life because I've just had what I thought were other priorities. But then, now being in it and now feeling it and now having this stuff again after a really, really long time, you just think, I know from the reports and stuff that I've done, I know from evidence that I've given to the Justice Committee and the, Joint Committee on Human Rights and stuff, that I have made a difference. I know I have. I know that this magazine, I know I haven't sent you the digital version of it. I will this evening.
Well, in that case, Farah, in that case, I think, and I'm sorry for interrupting you, then really what you're saying is, and I'm not going to blame you, I mean, why would I? It sounds as though maybe you should stop doing what you're doing then. Stop.
I'll never stop. I won't ever
No,
stop.
Yeah, but you understand what I mean though, because once you start looking at it, then it's so unfair on so many levels. So if you have to look after yourself at this stage and get yourself out, then
I think for me it's a sabbatical. It's a year or maybe a bit shorter or a bit longer. I don't know. Out of it and just get some. At the moment it's my living, my breathing, my everything, my work, my life, my job, my everything. So I think what I need to do is just get some space away and out, and then make a rational decision. I will never get out. I've started this incredible magazine, and that will continue. I mean, the support for that is amazing, and it's an incredible piece of work. And I have enough content for it for the next couple of years, and we'll continue to get content for it. But I think, for me, I first of all don't want to be suicided in prison, which I think is very much what.
Yeah, that's a good reason to shut up. I mean, I don't want that happening to you. It's better to just, as you said, if you can
No, I'll never shut up. It's not in my nature to shut up. I don't even know what that is. I mean, shut up is not an option, really. So it's about be a bit smart for a little bit, get out, and then make a rational decision how to go forward, and get people like the UN and some of the other sort of OPCAT agencies involved in it, and people like you and John and other friends just sort of saying, hang on a minute, what are you doing? What are you doing?
What are we doing? Yeah, exactly, allowing it, yeah.
Yeah. No, but just pointing out to sort of, I mean, John has a voice, you have a voice. It needs more people like that. I spent some time last week with Tracy and Nikki, Nikki is a lecturer and Tracy's the one who runs a charity with lived experience. It's people like that who need to sort of join together and actually start to make the wider points, isn't it?
Sure. Well, good talking to you, Farah.
Thank you. I look forward to getting it. And you must tell me what you think of the magazine. I will send you the PDF of it, if not tonight, first thing in the morning.
Okay, all the best.
Thank you, and you.
Bye.
Thank you, bye.